What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Backup Fantasy Sports. It is Sunday, April 10th, 2022. And today we're going to be talking about some F1 fantasy with the Australian Grand Prix just happening. It's going to be a winners and losers episode here today. So we are going to go over qualifying, the race, and then I will give winners and losers, my team recap, and then what is up next on the calendar. So let's just get right into it. All happened earlier this morning, 7 a.m. Germany time, 1 a.m. East Coast time in the States. But in qualifying yesterday on Saturday, there was a ton of drama. We had a crash in Q1 between Lance Stroll and Nicholas Latifi, which was eventually blamed on Lance Stroll. So he started all the way down at the back of the grid, along with Alexander Albon, who could not provide a fuel sample. So he also had to start at the back. But after Q1 and Q2 got done, Q3 was crazy. We had another red flag. Fernando Alonso was looking really strong, and he went out and actually cost Carlos Sainz a very good fourth place finish on the grid, and he could not get up to the top again after the qualifying restarted, and he ended up ninth on the grid. But it was another great day for the other Ferrari car as Charles Leclerc finished on pole for the second time this season. He's now gone first, second, first in the first three races. And Max Verstappen came in second. Sergio Perez was third. Lando Norris fourth. And then the two Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, were fifth and sixth on the third row. Charles said that he was struggling a little bit with the car in practice, but he took a risk in Q3 on turn 6 and it paid off, and he pipped Verstappen to the fastest time by about 0.3 of a second. Red Bull looked strong, but it never felt like Max was going to really get pole. He was on pole for a little bit, but then Charles took it back at the last second. And then McLaren actually finished seventh or fourth and seventh, and they seemed very surprised that they were that high, but they were pleasantly surprised. So that was qualifying. So let's get on to the race, which was awesome. There was a lot of different strategies going on. Once again, more drama in F1. So listening to the broadcast, they were talking about how Pole hasn't won this race in the last 8 attempts, and it was the first pole for Ferrari in Melbourne since 2008. So Leclerc got a good start. He held off Verstappen into turn 1, but Hamilton actually snuck his way up to third very quickly. Sainz started on the hard tire to try and make up some time, but it was a absolute disaster for the second Ferrari car as he spun off after 3 laps and he was done for the day. After the restart, there was a shot of Leclerc as he was pulling away from Max after the safety car went back into the pit lane that just showed the bouncing that the Ferrari was suffering from, and it did not look like it was going to be a strong day for them at the front, but they held on the entire race, and Leclerc actually ended up winning his second race of the season. Pole in Bahrain, he got the win. Pole in Australia, he got the win. Behind him, there was Perez and Hamilton were battling it out for a while. Sergio eventually got ahead of Hamilton, and it looked like maybe the Red Bulls could team up and get to the Ferrari, but that was just not the case. Ferrari, far too strong once again. Then on lap 24, Vettel skidded into the wall on turn 4, another safety car, and it benefited George Russell this time, who was third at that point. He pitted and he managed to stay in third that whole time. And then it was a case of only 3 cars hadn't pitted by that point. It was Fernando Alonso, Kevin Magnussen, and Alex Albon, which ended up being it determined quite a bit out of the top 10 with the way that went down. Leclerc nearly gave it away on the restart. And then right after that, Verstappen pulled over. Second time in 3 races, the defending world champ is out. And as of 10:15 Germany time on Sunday, they still haven't determined, Red Bull still haven't determined what was wrong. Christian Horner said that it may have been a fuel issue, not a engine issue, but they still do not know. So yeah, second time in 3 races for Verstappen where he doesn't finish, and that is not a great start to the season. Fernando Alonso eventually pitted on a virtual safety car, and he got fresh tires for the final 17 laps, but he ended up coming out into some traffic, couldn't get through, developed some tire problems, and just was tumbling down the race standings. Perez looked pretty comfortable in P2 after Verstappen went out, and he nearly gave it away. He went into the grass a little bit, but he held on and he took home his first podium of the season. And then the crazy thing was that Alex Albon pitted on the second to last lap. He went 57 laps on one set of tires. He came out and he actually clung on to 10th place to get Williams their first point of the 2022 season. And yeah, great for them. Great result for that team. And then George Russell came in third after Perez. Him and Hamilton went 3-4. So Mercedes come away from the weekend with the most constructors' points. And once again, even though they're not as strong this season as they have been in the past, they are still getting the points. They're still finishing the races, which is more than Ferrari or Red Bull can say at this point. So yeah, it was a crazy race. Leclerc had that one slight mistake, but recovered. He was absolutely dominant. Perez kind of looked more comfortable all weekend than Max. He nearly had that late slide into the grass, but he held on for that first podium. Russell obviously benefited from Max going down and the safety car, but he actually had a really strong weekend. And to be honest, I think he deserved the podium over Lewis. He's been a lot stronger in that Mercedes this year. We'll get to him in a little bit. Hamilton, the Mercedes looked a lot better, significantly less bouncing on the straights, but he doesn't seem very happy with the team at this point. So it's going to be interesting what they can do before the next race. And then Lando Norris, second straight race with points, which seems like a miracle from the way they were talking after Bahrain. And I think they were kind of competing with Hamilton about a third of the way through the race, but it eventually fell off. And then Lando Norris's teammate Daniel Ricciardo in his home country race gets his first points of the year. So that was qualifying and the race recap. It was kind of crazy. And now it is time to get into 3 winners and 3 losers from this weekend's Australian Grand Prix. Winners, got to be Charles Leclerc. Stretches his championship lead to 34 points, which is a bigger gap than anyone had in 2021 at any point from first to second place. So that's great for him. 3 consecutive podiums, 2 poles. He's got 139 fantasy points on the season. The one mistake I made was in the first race of the season. I put the turbo driver on Carlos Sainz over him, and it cost me a few points, but he's been fantastic the last 2 races, and it will be sad days when he goes over that $20 million threshold and you can no longer use the turbo driver on him. But he's pretty template at this point. Like if you don't have him on as one of your 5 drivers, you are falling as far behind the pack as Mercedes are on the actual track. Yeah, he's the only turbo driver at the moment, 18.8 million. If he can get through Italy with this streak intact, I'm thinking it's going to be a great time to play that mega driver card, triple points, with the way that how strong Ferrari looks, with Red Bull struggling right now, with the Mega Driver card, you could get that on him and just triple up while Ferrari have the upper hand on Red Bull and Mercedes. There may not be a better point in the season or in the first half of the year to use it than then if you want to take advantage of just having a driver who seems to be in the form of his life right now. So Charles Leclerc leads the driver standings, has led Ferrari to the top of the constructors championship standings right now. He's the first winner. Second winner, George Russell. First podium in the Mercedes, so golf clap for him. He's actually up to second in the drivers' championship standings. So don't think a lot of us would have predicted that after 3 races, that George Russell would be ahead of Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. And he honestly looked stronger than Hamilton this weekend, and he's looked stronger than Hamilton most of the season. He and Leclerc they are the 2 drivers that have qualified and finished a race in the top 10. So they are the only 2 drivers right now with a qualifying streak at 3 and a race streak at 3. So while Leclerc is obviously about 6 million cheaper, maybe 5 million cheaper now that he's gone all the way up. But Russell could start to creep in to one of your 5 drivers' thoughts right now with Leclerc, Sainz, and Perez all around the same price point, and with Lando Norris kind of struggling, although he is getting a lot better in the last 2 races. It's been easy to get away from Lewis Hamilton, Verstappen, and George Russell. But if Russell keeps this up and gets another top 10, a Q3 in Italy, and then a top 10 finish as well, he could well be worth trying to get into your team for that Miami race in a few weeks' time. He's got 87 fantasy points on the year, but yeah, like I said, the price tag is a little difficult to get him in right now. But if you want to try and build up some team value, give yourself some budget so you can get him in for Miami, that would be not a bad strategy at all. And then the final winner is going to be McLaren. Double points for the first time this year. Both drivers got into Q3. Ricciardo gets his first points. Lando came up with a P4 in qualifying. On the first corner, he was squeezed out by Hamilton and Perez. So that was a little bit tough start to his race, and it kind of settled them in as the next 2 up with Norris and Ricciardo. At this point, Bahrain has to feel like a bad dream to that team. They had a disastrous opening weekend to the F1 2022 season, but now Norris has scored points in back-to-back races. Both drivers made Q3, and they seem to be making strides every week as they get to grips with the new car and how to drive it. With Ricciardo, he had COVID during preseason testing, so he's finally getting the laps in and starting to feel more comfortable with the car. His second year with the team, he's starting to just feel more at home in the McLaren garage. And even though they had a disastrous start to the season, they now find themselves at the top of the midfield ahead of Alpine, Alfa Romeo, Haas, and AlphaTauri. So that's a positive. The arrow is definitely pointing up for McLaren, especially after a disastrous first weekend of the season. And honorable mention winner doesn't get a full breakdown, but it's got to be Alex Albon. Started dead last on the grid in 20th, went 57 laps on one set of tires, pitted on the 57th of 58 laps, and he still got 10th place and Williams their first point of the 2022 season, which is a huge deal. So well done to Alex Albon. And that is all of the winners. So Charles Leclerc, George Russell, McLaren, and then honorable mention goes to Alex Albon. Now on to the less fun part, the losers. And I think there's only one place to really start here, and that's got to be Max Verstappen. Absolute nightmare start to his title defense in 2022. He hasn't finished 2 of the 3 races this year. Red Bull's reliability, it can be fixed, but you definitely want to be finishing races. There haven't been a ton of post-race quotes come out yet, but one of them was Verstappen saying he's not even worried or he's not even thinking about the drivers' championship right now. He just wants his car to consistently finish races. He sounds pretty frustrated. I mean, he won the only race that he started or finished, so that's great in that regard. But yeah, he finds himself sixth in the driver standings, even though you would have to say he's had the second strongest car of the season behind Charles Leclerc. But yeah, one race finished out of 3 is not how you want to start. And coming up, the next race in a couple of weeks is at Imola. He's only raced there once in his career in 2020, and he also retired there. So hopefully he can at least finish that race and get back up the driver's standing. Fantasy wise, I think he's still a no go here just because he has the qualifying streak coming up. Like he looks really strong in qualifying, but without a race streak, it just I mean, with Leclerc, Russell, even Sergio Perez now, like those are all pretty strong candidates, and you can pretty much fit 2 of those guys in for one Max Verstappen. So I wouldn't be actively trying to get him in. I think on the preview podcast, I was talking about how he could be a future target if he keeps finishing races and just looking as dominant as he did in Saudi Arabia. But with the stuff that's going on with Red Bull right now, I think he is a stay away. He's getting you 1.77 points per $1,000,000 you're spending on him, which is below, it's way out of the top 5, but it's also below George Russell, Perez, Sainz, and Hamilton. All those guys are getting you at least 2.3 points per $1,000,000, and Verstappen is now down at 1.77. So definitely not an option in fantasy right now, especially with how much of your budget you have to commit towards him. So he was the first loser. He's really the biggest loser of the weekend, but there are 2 more guys I got to mention here. So one is Fernando Alonso. He looked so strong in qualifying. He was putting up tremendous times in the Alpine. People were talking about like, could he get a pole? Like is he going to be on the front row? But he had a late slip up in Q3, crashed into the wall. That left him in 10th place. But then again, this morning during the race, he looked really strong in the race. He was kind of climbing through. I think he was up to 4th or 5th at one point, and he was on the hard tires. Went most of the race on one set of tires. He pitted on lap 41, came out of the pits, unfortunately, and was just trapped in this traffic jam down in 14th and just couldn't navigate his way through to get some speed up into the tires. And then, according to the broadcast, his tire started to blister or get worn down too quickly. And that was just the end of Alonso's weekend. And it just saw him like go right down the race standings. And he eventually finished out of the points. And I think he just comes in as a loser because there was so much potential and he looked so good for the majority of the weekend, and to finish outside the points and really have nothing to show for his efforts is pretty disappointing, just from a real life thing and from a fantasy F1 aspect as well. So his teammate Esteban Ocon, he's now finished in the points back-to-back weekends where Alonso has not. He looks more consistent right now. He's probably not the better driver. I still think Alonso is the better driver. But yeah, Ocon's now finished top 10, 3 races in a row. And I mean, points are points in fantasy. So if Alonso is not going to get you those points, Ocon is 12.6 million, Alonso is 12.4. If maybe Alonso has a higher ceiling. We just haven't hit the ceiling yet, but he definitely has a lower floor, as we have seen over the past 2 weekends. Final loser has got to be Carlos Sainz. Kind of like Alonso, just such an unlucky weekend. He looked super good through practice, Q1, Q2, and he had a great time going in Q3. And they clocked it, and this time would have put him fourth on the grid, second row, would have been there to support Leclerc. And a red flag caused by Fernando Alonso's crash in Q3 canceled that timeout. By the time they could get back out, he couldn't get any temperature in his tires, so he couldn't do a prep lap, and he had to try and qualify on cold tires, finished ninth in Q3, and that forced them to the back of the grid, where I guess Ferrari thought that they should go with the hard compound tires so he could go longer, make up more time throughout the race, maybe only pit once, even though a lot of teams ended up only pitting once, but so he could get back up to the top and help out Charles. Didn't work out, immediately spun out on the third lap, I think. He'll be back, but it was a pretty tough weekend for the Spanish driver, who loses his race streak and comes up with negative points for the first time this season with a -5 in the fantasy game. And like winners, I got an honorable mention for the losers. I think it's between Alfa Romeo and Haas. I mean, on F1's YouTube channel on the weekend warm up, the hosts were talking about how Alfa Romeo and Haas were sounding really confident. They were expecting to score points, but only Valtteri Bottas, out of the 4 drivers, he was the only one that finished in points. And honestly, that was like a little bit lucky because he had like Alonso's tire issues, Verstappen's DNF, Albon pitting. Like, he eventually got up there into the points, which is better than nothing. But they seriously lacked pace, and so did Haas all weekend. They had Magnussen looked a little bit better on race day. Mick Schumacher got into Q2, but it seemed like a step back for both of those teams compared to what they were showing us over the first 2 races of the season. And also, just to add insult to injury, Bottas saw his Q3 streak end at a 103 Grand Prix, which was a modern era F1 record. So, winners, losers, that's all wrapped up. How did my F1 fantasy team do this weekend? 212 points. Not bad. I'm on the F1 site right now. It has not updated to see how I did for the week compared to everyone else. But 631 total points right now. I still have my wild card. I still have my mega driver. The only slip up I've really made this year, from what I can tell, is the whole not having Leclerc as my turbo driver week 1. But, first weekend ever playing fantasy F1. So it feels like it's been a strong start to the season as I try to learn this game. So Leclerc, 98 points, turbo driver, so 49 points, but double that. Perez came in with 35, Bottas with 20, Ocon with 20, Sainz with a -5, and Ferrari with 44, who got their qualifying bonus streak going, but I do not think they got the race because Sainz spun out. So that would have been a perfect way to end the week with another +5 bonus there, but it's all good. So just getting a little greedy there. Heading to Imola, Italy now with a team value of 102.7 million and 0.9 million in the bank. The one thing I'll probably be watching over the next couple of weeks is Esteban Ocon's sentiment. He's 53% of the way down to a price decrease for me. So I expect that to probably go back the other way now that he finished top 10, unless people are just not impressed by him all that much. I expect Leclerc and Ferrari to keep climbing up. They've been just great team value boosters for me since the beginning of the year. Leclerc's already up 0.8, Ferrari's up 0.8 as well. So 1.6 of my 2.7 million in team value is due to their rises, but that will probably go up a little bit more as the next couple of weeks come around. And yeah, I think with 3 free subs, I might, depending on what I see after this race, once like the US wakes up and stuff, I might go from Signs to Lando in case Lando sees a massive like swell in price because of his 2 strong results. And it could be kind of a gain some team value. I'll have to take the hit on losing. Like Signs has gone up a bunch this season, but I will I don't mind that too much if it means I can bank some more team value by getting onto Norris. And who knows, maybe I'll stick with him for the Italian Grand Prix coming up in 2 weekends' time. Yeah. So that's what's next on the F1 calendar. It's a trip to Italy and the Imola Grand Prix, formerly known as San Marino, I believe, but they added it because of the 2020 COVID season. They were trying to get more races in. So that is coming back for 2022. It's going to be the first sprint race of the season. So that will make our fantasy decisions a lot harder because it's going to be practice 1 on Friday along with qualifying on Friday night. So we will have to get our teams set on a Friday, not a Saturday afternoon, as fantasy F1 managers. So you go practice, qualifying, then practice, then sprint, and then the race is on Sunday. So you'll have to have those teams locked in Friday afternoon. The preview podcast for that will probably be out a day or two before that weekend starts. Look at some dynamic pricing changes. If anyone is telling us that they've made upgrades to their car with a 2-week break. But yeah, first race in Europe for the 2022 season after being abroad, I guess is what you would call it, for the first 3 races of the year. And it'll be a nice little break after a very busy weekend in Australia, but it was a fantastic weekend of racing. Qualifying and the race were both great. It was a sold out crowd in Australia. I think on the broadcast they were saying that it set a record for the biggest sporting event in Australian history. So that was crazy. I guess they were very ready to see F1 in their country for the first time since 2019. And the time zone was perfect. Loved watching a race at 7 a.m. with a bed coffee and just lying in bed watching it. But that will do it for today's podcast. F1 Fantasy Australian Grand Prix winners and losers. I've been your host, Euan Leith. You can follow me on Twitter at Euin or You Out. And you can like, subscribe, follow the podcast wherever you're listening. And once again, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you next time.